Hello and welcome to another episode of Exploring Standards. I am your host, Jess, and today I'm really excited to welcome back on the podcast, Danny Lee. So, Danny, you've been on the podcast before previously. You're a guest all the way back in season 2, and you did a fabulous episode with Donna Clements, and it was all about your transition from RAF to ISO consultancy and the skills that you could transfer over. It is a fantastic listen. So, if you haven't heard that podcast, I'll pop a link in the show description. You can check it out. But our podcast today, we're actually looking at AS9100. But before we dive right into that, can you give us a bit more about your background and how it relates to quality in aviation, Danny?
Yeah, sure. Hey, Jess, thanks for having me again. It's a pleasure to be here. So I spent 15 years in the Royal Air Force working in the military aviation environment. And for 2 of those years, I was the senior quality manager, leading a team of 130 personnel through all things quality management. I was primarily responsible for making sure that logistics and engineering outputs met strict quality standards, and with a strong focus on airworthiness, safety, and reliability. So quality wasn't just a bolt-on, it was a core part of the entire operation. And that experience gave me a real appreciation for structured quality systems, especially in high-risk environments like aviation, space, and defence.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. So let's get into the juicy bits. Can we start with the basic of what exactly is AS9100 and who is it for?
Yeah, so AS9100 is the International Quality Management System, and it's a standard specifically for the aviation, space, and defence industries. It's based on ISO 9001, but it goes further to address the risks, safety, and reliability needs of those particular sectors. So if your organisation supplies parts, materials, services, or assemblies into those industries, AS9100 is the standard that your customers expect you to meet. And for many, certification isn't optional. It's actually a commercial necessity.
Okay, that's really interesting. That obviously it's not optional. I'm sure we'll get a bit more into that in a moment. So a lot of companies already have ISO 9001, the quality management system standard, which obviously we've talked about on the podcast before. So why do these industries need something more?
Yeah, so ISO 9001 is a strong foundation for quality management, and it focuses on customer satisfaction, process controls, and continuous improvement. But in aviation, space, and defence, the consequences of failure are far more serious, right? And so AS 9100 adds specific requirements that help prevent issues before they can impact safety, airworthiness, and compliance. It brings in enhanced risk management, product safety, and stricter controls over things like suppliers, configuration, and counterfeit parts. So it's essentially ISO 9001, but with safeguards tailored for safety critical industries in aviation, space, and defence.
I mean, it makes total sense, doesn't it? Obviously, it's such a high risk industry. If there wasn't this standard, it wouldn't really make sense, would it? So obviously, aside from what we're just talking about, the safety aspects, what would you say that are the business benefits of implementing AS 9100?
Yeah, the first is definitely access. So many aviation, space, and defence customers won't even consider a supplier that isn't AS 9100 certified. It also helps organisations improve internally by building more robust, traceable processes, and effectively reducing non-conformities in their products and the services that they offer. It also builds credibility and trust. So when customers see that you've met AS 9100, they know that your systems are designed to deliver consistently and safely, which is the key thing. And it's not just about passing audits, it's about becoming a supplier of choice.
I love that, more than just passing an audit, because sometimes it does seem to come across as like a checkbox, like, oh yeah, we're doing this, but actually there's so much more in it. So we've already spoke about ISO 9001. So how does AS 9100 relate to ISO 9001? Are they completely different systems?
No, not at all. So they're built to work together, right? So AS 9100 contains the entirety of ISO 9001 standard, word for word, and then it adds stricter requirements that are specific to aviation, space, and defence operations on top of that. So if a company already has ISO 9001 in place, then they've already got a good foundation to build from as they progress to AS 9100.
Okay, interesting. So what are some of those extra requirements? Can you kind of like walk us through a little bit of them?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's several key areas where AS 9100 goes beyond ISO 9001. So first, there's product safety. So AS 9100 requires organizations to actively manage and control safety risks throughout the product lifecycle. So from design to all the way through to delivery. We've then got counterfeit part prevention. So you need to have systems in place to ensure that only genuine authorized components make it into your products or into the supply chain. We also then have operational risk management, and that's another big one. So while ISO 9001 talks about risk at a strategic level, AS9100 drills down into the day-to-day operational risks that could affect quality or delivery. There's also configuration management, and this is about ensuring that changes to specifications, drawings, and processes are properly tracked and controlled throughout the whole life cycle. Another key area is the identification and control of critical items and key characteristics. And these are features or components that have direct impact on safety or performance. AS9100 also expects strong supply controls. And that includes flowing down customer and regulatory requirements, monitoring performance, and managing risks in the supply chain. It adds on-time delivery and quality performance monitoring as well, to ensure that your outputs are not just compliant, but also consistently delivering their results. There's also first article inspections, and that verifies that production processes are capable before going into full-scale manufacturing operations. We've got human factors and airworthiness. They're also brought in. And so in terms of human factors, staff need to understand how their individual actions affect safety and quality, and be trained accordingly. And the standard also requires a focus on ethical behaviour, so integrity, responsibility, and professional conduct. And it must be built into the culture of the organisation. And one of the biggest ones that I haven't mentioned yet, and it was obviously massive in the Royal Air Force, and it's also big in aerospace in general, is foreign object debris prevention. So we're talking about anything from a stray screw to a piece of packaging that could end up inside a component that could cause catastrophic failure. And AS9100 expects you to have controls in place to prevent that at every stage. So from the shop floor all the way to the final packaging. So while ISO 9001 gives you a solid quality foundation, AS9100 takes it to another level. And that's especially important when lives depend on the product working exactly as intended.
Yeah, do you know what, thank you so much. That sort of really was a great overview and kind of explains just how much more of that step that this standard takes, from 9001. Okay, so let's make this practical now. So let's say I'm a precision engineer company with ISO 9001 already in place, but now I want to expand into the aviation sector. How do I make the leap to AS 9100?
Yeah, great question. And that's a very realistic scenario that we tend to see. So if you're already ISO 9001 certified, you've got the foundations in place. The first step really is for a gap analysis. And that's where you can look at what AS9100 expects and where your current system falls short. So let's say you're making machine components, right? Precision engineering. You'd want to ask, are customers and regulatory requirements being flowed down to suppliers? Do we actively manage operational risks in our processes? Are design and specification changes controlled through configuration management? Do we have counterfeit part prevention processes? Are we tracking on-time delivery and product quality? And are we using that data to actually improve? And there's many more questions to be asked. And often we tend to see that companies are already doing many of those things informally. And AS9100 is just about formalizing that work, documenting it, and then aligning it with the standard. So for companies looking to grow into aviation, space and defence, it's basically the next logical step.
I mean, that makes total sense. Absolutely. So obviously we talked a lot about this. Is AS 9100 really just for the big players, or is it, are there some of the small businesses benefit from it too?
Yeah, so it's definitely for both. So large organizations need it for customer requirements, but small and medium-sized businesses benefit just as much. So it gives them structure, credibility, and access to bigger customers, which is always a win. And when it's implemented well, AS9100 scales with your business, and it doesn't have to be overcomplicated.
Okay, I think that's really good to know, because obviously standards do seem sometimes quite overwhelming, especially for those small enterprises and small businesses. And the fact that it can scale with your company and it doesn't have to be overwhelming, I think it's going to be something that small businesses are going to really want to know about. Right then, what mistakes do companies commonly make when trying to implement AS9100?
Yeah, the most common one, and this probably applies to a lot of standards out there, is treating it like a paperwork exercise. So they tend to bolt the extra requirements onto ISO 9001 without actually changing how the business practically works. And that leads to a bloated system that doesn't actually add value. Another mistake is treating it as just a quality thing. So AS9100 needs to involve the entire business, especially operations, purchasing, and leadership. And when it's built around how your business actually runs, it becomes a tool and not a burden.
Yeah, I get that, because obviously people just think, they said, like, it's a tick box. Let's just do this. Well, actually, let's implement right into your whole business, and let's make your business better. Okay, so if someone's thinking of getting started with AS9100, what should their first step be?
Yeah, so I would definitely recommend starting with a structured gap analysis, and that will show you where you already meet the standard, and then where the gaps in your system currently are. The next important thing to do then is to build a plan and stage it in such a way that it's manageable. So then update your documentation, train your team, and then begin internal audits. And the key is to keep it simple, build it around your actual operations, and then avoid overcomplicating things. It's a tough standard as it is. You don't need to make it any more complicated than it needs to be.
Yeah, 100%. And obviously, if you need any support with the gap analysis, or any part of your implementation journey, then Ascent can help. And if you reach out to us, we can certainly help you and point you in the right direction. Okay, finally, what is your one big takeaway for anyone considering AS9100?
Yeah, so it's the same again for everything we talk about, right? And everything that you preach about at Ascent is that the standards aren't just about passing the audits. They're actually about improving the businesses. And AS9100 does exactly that as well. And it's about building that confidence in your team, in your customers, and then the way that your actual business operates. It helps you reduce risk, improve performance, and then grow sustainably in the aviation, space, and defense sectors. So if you're already working with ISO 9001, you're more than halfway there, which is the good news. So all that's left to do really is to take the next step and build a system that supports you and not just the certificate.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Right. We have been talking about AS9100. Danny, thank you so much. I think this episode has been really informative and kind of is going to really give people a nice overview of the standard and kind of where they need to go to make sure it's achievable. If you have enjoyed listening to today's episode, please make sure you rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the podcast. And I'll be back with an episode in a couple of weeks.